For most of history, a royal marriage had almost nothing to do with love. Kings and queens married for power, for alliances, for territory, for bloodlines, and for the all-important production of heirs. Affection, if it came at all, came later, and often it never came at all, which left a vast and delicate question hanging over nearly every throne in history. What happened when the king or the queen fell in love or into bed with someone who was not their royal spouse? The royal mistress and the royal lover were among the most powerful, most dangerous, and most fascinating figures in the courts of the past. A king's mistress could rise from nothing to dazzling wealth and political influence. A queen's lover could topple a kingdom, and the wronged royal spouse, the queen who watched her husband shower another woman with jewels and power, or the king whose wife took a lover, had to navigate one of the most explosive situations imaginable, where personal jealousy collided with politics, succession, scandal, and sometimes the fate of nations. Today, we're going to explore the secret politics of the royal bedroom, how kings and queens handled each other's lovers, the power of the royal mistress, the deadly danger faced by the royal lover, and the extraordinary ways in which the most personal of human dramas became affairs of state. Using advanced AI trained on the memoirs and letters of royal courts, the chronicles and histories of European and other monarchies, and the work of historians who have studied the institution of the royal mistress and the politics of dynastic marriage, we have reconstructed this hidden world. The first thing to understand is the great double standard that ran through almost all of it. For kings, taking a mistress was, in many courts, an accepted and almost institutionalized practice. A king was expected to marry for dynastic reasons, often to a foreign princess he had never met, chosen for political advantage. Having done his duty by marrying and producing legitimate heirs, a king was widely tolerated, even expected, to seek pleasure and companionship elsewhere. In some courts, particularly in France, the position of the king's chief mistress became almost an official one, a recognized role at court with its own status, apartments, and influence, sometimes even acknowledged with a semi-official title. The royal mistress in such a court was not a hidden, shameful secret, but a public figure, the most fashionable woman in the kingdom, a leader of taste and culture, a patron of artists, and a power broker whose favor courtiers desperately sought. Some royal mistresses became enormously powerful, influencing the king's decisions, securing positions and fortunes for their families and allies, and shaping policy from behind the scenes. They could make or break careers with a word in the king's ear. The greatest of them are remembered by history as figures of real political importance, not mere bedfellows. For queens, however, the situation was utterly different and far more dangerous. A queen's fidelity was not merely a matter of personal morality, it was a matter of the highest political importance because of the question of succession. The entire system of hereditary monarchy depended on the certainty that the queen's children were truly the king's children. A king's illegitimate children by a mistress were a scandal, but not a threat to the bloodline. A queen's illegitimate child, however, could potentially be passed off as a legitimate heir, corrupting the royal bloodline and the succession itself. For this reason, a queen's adultery was regarded as one of the gravest possible crimes, a form of treason against the dynasty and the state. While kings flaunted their mistresses, queens were watched, guarded, and held to an absolute standard of fidelity. A queen suspected of taking a lover faced not just scandal, but potential catastrophe, disgrace, imprisonment, the questioning of her children's legitimacy, and, in the most extreme cases in history, execution. The double standard was stark and brutal. The king's lover was an institution. The queen's lover was a death sentence. So, how did the wronged royal spouse actually cope? Let us start with the queens who had to share their husbands. A queen who watched her husband take a powerful mistress faced an agonizing situation, and queens responded in a whole range of ways. Some queens chose dignity and endurance, rising above the situation, focusing on their own role, their children, their religious devotion, and their position as the true and lawful queen, and quietly outlasting the mistresses who came and went. There was real power in this strategy. The mistress might have the king's passion, but the queen had the crown, the legitimacy, and often the long game. Mistresses fell from favor, aged were replaced, the queen remained the queen. Some queens formed surprisingly pragmatic relationships with their husbands' mistresses, tolerating or even befriending them, recognizing that open hostility was futile and that a cooperative arrangement served everyone better. Other queens fought bitterly, using their own influence, their families and court factions to undermine and remove a hated mistress, turning the court into a battlefield of rival women and their allies. And some queens were simply crushed by the humiliation, retreating into misery, religion, or bitterness. The queen's task was made harder by the fact that she usually could not simply leave. Divorce was difficult or impossible, and her position depended entirely on remaining the king's wife, no matter how he treated her. And what about the kings whose queens took lovers? Here, because of the deadly seriousness of queenly adultery, the responses could be far more severe. A king who discovered, or even suspected, that his queen had been unfaithful faced not just personal betrayal, but a threat to his honor, his bloodline, and his throne. History records cases that ended in the most brutal fashion: queens accused of adultery imprisoned, cast aside, or, in the most infamous examples, put on trial and executed, along with their alleged lovers who faced terrible deaths for the crime of loving a queen. Sometimes these accusations were genuine, sometimes they were political weapons, fabricated or exaggerated by a king who wished to be rid of a wife for other reasons, the charge of adultery providing a convenient and devastating pretext. The royal lover of a queen played perhaps the most dangerous game in the entire world, for discovery could mean torture and death, and even the suspicion of intimacy with the queen could be fatal. To catch the eye of a queen was to dance on the edge of the executioner's blade. But the politics ran deeper still, because the royal lover or mistress was never just a personal matter, they were a political force, and managing them was an act of statecraft. A clever king could use his mistress as a political tool, a back channel, a source of information, a way to float ideas, a means of rewarding allies. A clever queen, or a clever faction at court, could try to control the king by controlling his mistress, seeking to place a woman friendly to their interests in the king's bed, knowing that whoever held the king's affection held a measure of power. Court factions formed around and against the royal favourites. The rise of a new mistress could signal a shift in policy and the fall of one set of courtiers and the rise of another. The mistress's family and allies rose with her and fell with her. In this way, the most intimate corner of the royal household, the question of who shared the monarch's bed, became entangled with the highest affairs of state, with war and peace, with appointments and dismissals, with the rise and fall of great families, and with the direction of entire kingdoms. The royal bedroom was not separate from politics. It was, in a very real sense, one of the central arenas of politics. And occasionally, against all the odds, there was genuine love, and that brought its own complications. Sometimes a king fell so deeply in love with a mistress that he wished to make her his queen, or to give her power and recognition that scandalized the court and threatened the established order. Sometimes a monarch's devotion to a favorite, whether a lover or simply a beloved companion, grew so great that it provoked jealousy, resentment, and political crisis, with courtiers and even the royal family conspiring against a favorite who had grown too powerful or too close to the throne. In the most dramatic cases in history, a monarch's love for someone deemed unsuitable could shake the very foundations of the throne, forcing terrible choices between the heart and the crown. For the iron logic of monarchy was that the monarch did not truly belong to themselves. They belonged to the dynasty, to the state, to the succession. Their marriages were arranged for them, their duty was to produce heirs, and their personal desires were always, in the end, subordinate to the needs of the crown. The royal lover and the royal mistress lived in the narrow, dangerous, glittering space between the monarch's human heart and the cold demands of power, and that is precisely what made them, throughout history, such fascinating, powerful, and often tragic figures. That was the secret politics of the royal bedroom. A world governed by a brutal double standard in which kings took mistresses as an accepted institution, sometimes elevating them to dazzling official power, while queens were held to absolute fidelity on pain of disgrace or death because the legitimacy of the entire bloodline depended upon it. A world in which wronged queens endured, befriended, fought, or were crushed by their rivals, in which betrayed kings could respond with imprisonment and the executioner, in which the royal lover played the most dangerous game on earth, and in which the most intimate human questions of love, desire, and jealousy became inseparable from the highest affairs of state. The royal mistress and the royal lover were never merely private indulgences. They were power and danger and politics, and sometimes the fate of kingdoms, all wrapped up in the oldest and most human of dramas. Behind the crowns and the ceremony and the dynastic marriages, the kings and queens of history were human beings with human hearts and human desires, and the ways they loved and the ways they handled each other's loves shaped not only their own lives, but again and again, the destinies of the nations they ruled.